Hello, everybody, and welcome to my channel. Thank you so much to all the people who are still with me, and we recently reached 1,000 subscribers and climbing. So thank you much for supporting me. And for all of you who are new to the channel, welcome. I'm so excited to continue to share information around the subject of compliance, for which I am extremely passionate about. And I hope to be answering a lot of your questions going forward as well on the profession, on the skill sets, on all sorts of things. And I hope that you continue to enjoy the videos that I'm posting on this channel and will continue to post. So be sure to subscribe, switch that notification button on so that you always have the latest news and know when a video has been uploaded. Okay, with that being said, I want to jump into this video because this is a video that I have often received a lot of questions about. And I've noticed a trend where people sometimes think that compliance equals anti-money laundering. And although anti-money laundering and that space and that discipline is super interesting and super exciting and definitely a very important career path for within the compliance space, compliance is around so many things. Where there's a law, where there's a regulation, even something that has absolutely nothing to do with money laundering, there is a requirement for us to comply with it. So today I want to talk to you about 5 different career options that you have available to you within compliance. And yes, I will still address anti-money laundering because, like I said, it is an exciting space and you can have a firm, multifaceted, dynamic career within that space. But I also want you guys to appreciate the other options that you have available within compliance. And if you want to go AML, amazing. And if some of the other compliance career options appeal to you, great, my job is done. You can do your homework and go even more in depth and learn a heck of a lot more about the different options that are available to you. But let's get stuck into it. I know you want to know what I have to share, so let's go. So the first job that I want to talk to you about is my personal favorite because this is essentially what my career was, and that was the role of a regulatory compliance officer. In some organizations, they call this role more of a generalist compliance type of role. And why this is the case is that it doesn't deal with one area of specialization or one subject matter. You have to know everything about everything, but not necessarily as in-depth as you would if you were a specialization. So think about your regulatory compliance role as kind of your jack of all trades within compliance. Let me explain a little bit more. So when you're a regulatory compliance officer, you have to know all the laws and regulations and standards that are applicable to your specific business. And then you also have to have your ear to the ground and stay very aware of upcoming changes in laws, new laws, whatever the case may be, that are going to impact your business and be able to advise them that this is coming down the line, this is how it's going to impact you, this is what we need to put in place to comply with those new regulations. So essentially, you have to be the person who is aware of everything that is impacting your business and be able to advise them in terms of the impact and necessary changes that need to be made. So that's essentially at a very high level, the role of a regulatory compliance officer. You then need to also be able to do the CRMP process, your compliance risk management plan, end to end. Having got this regulatory universe where you know everything that applies to your business, you need to be able to identify the specific risks, assess those risks, put in place a plan to monitor those risks, and manage those risks. So you have to do the CRMP as a regulatory compliance person. So it's quite a dynamic area to be in and place to practice because you get to dabble in everything. You will touch on AML, you will touch on data protection, you will touch on your market conduct regulations and make sure all of that is being placed. You will touch on consumer protection. Everything that applies to your specific business that you're responsible as a compliance officer for will be within your remit. And then you're also going to have to train people in your business about their compliance obligations from a regulatory perspective. So you're going to have to conduct that training, make sure those people who need to know about a specific area know about it, those who need to know about, you know, everything like a code of conduct type of training, know about it, whether it's delivered electronically or face-to-face, whatever the case may be. Training from a compliance perspective will be part of your permit. And obviously this and how it's delivered is going to very much depend on the size of your organization. So humongous multinational global organizations might have a separate training team just because of the mammoth task it would be for a regulatory compliance officer, and the number of departments and the number of lines of business and the number of products is just not practical. But if you are in a smaller business, maybe a local organization with a much smaller footprint, then, you know, the training is definitely going to be something that sits with you as the regulatory compliance officer. So again, some of these things that I'm talking to you about in terms of the roles and responsibilities might look very different depending on the size of the organization that you're within. Whereas if one organization might have a single compliance officer who does AML, who does data privacy, who does regulatory compliance and regulatory affairs and everything, another organization is literally going to have different roles covering all of these things, because it's just not feasible to have it done by one person. So keep that in mind as you are considering these roles that I am taking you through today. So one of the other things that you're going to do as a regulatory compliance officer is also to advise on the corporate compliance policies. So we have policies that we put in place that are as a result of regulatory requirements. So you have a data privacy policy because there's a Data Protection Act. But then you are going to have to also deal with things that are purely corporate compliance policies. An example of that would be something like your gifts and entertainment policy, your social media management policy that's talking about how you're supposed to conduct yourself and speaking on behalf of the organization, and when you can and when you can't, and what permissions you need. And like I said, gifts and entertainment, can you go out with this client? Can you accept a gift from a client? All of those type of things. So those type of corporate compliance policies will also fall within your world, and you will need to be able to advise people who come with questions around what can I do, what do I need to declare, what needs to be approved, what isn't approvable, and the such. So regulatory compliance, very broad. Like I said, it is one of those things that is described as a generalist role. So you need to have a lot of knowledge around the policies that apply within a business, the procedures that apply within a business. You also need to have a firm handle on the business itself. You cannot advise and put in place control environments and monitor something that you don't understand. So a firm handle on the products and the services, and you are the person who, the specializations that I'm going to get into next, they rely on you as a subject matter expert for your line of business, their products, their services, their processes, when they are looking to implement their area of specialization. So if I am responsible for the credit card business compliance and I need to work with the AML person, the AML specialist, that subject matter is their area of expertise, but they don't necessarily know my business specifically. So it's all about collaborating and working together. I'm bringing the compliance business expertise and they're bringing their subject matter expertise, and together we're going to design controls, manage risk effectively, and bring those two pieces of expertise, specialization, knowledge together. Okay. All right. I was trying not to wax lyrical. I can talk about regulatory compliance forever, but I do have 4 other roles that I need to share with you, and I don't want to do a 2-hour-long video. So let's jump into the next role. And that is your data privacy officer role. So this is something that's very topical at the moment within the African context. South Africa had a data protection act that became effective in the last couple of years. Similar Zimbabwe, similar Botswana. You've had more mature jurisdictions in terms of regulating data protection, like the UK, Europe, where they've got, the GDPR. So, it's something that is developing on this continent and a lot more mature in other continents. And, as the discipline grows, especially on the African continent, I think it's going to be a great area of specialization. As well as we are in the digital age, data is something that people sometimes describe as the new oil in terms of its importance and value to the business of the digital era. So managing it, respecting people's rights around it is something that a data privacy officer contributes to and is focused on doing. So if you're a data privacy officer, what are you looking at? You're looking at all those privacy laws that apply to your business, whether there's international ones or just your local business. What do those mean for you? You're going to have to do an impact assessment to see what is the impact of these laws to your business. Design policies, put in place controls to make sure you're complying with everything around data collection, data processing, data management, even down to data deletion, because you have to delete it in a way that doesn't leave the data potentially exposed. You can't just throw a floppy disk full of information. Floppy disk. You can't just flow some, hard drive or whatever into a dustbin with client data on it. There has to be a way in which your policies and procedures make sure that it's destroyed in a way that doesn't leave it at risk for exposure. So those are the type of issues that a data privacy officer is looking at. And you also have to train the staff on that specific subject matter. This is how someone can potentially come in and pretend to be someone. You've got phishing emails, you've got, cyber attacks, and this is what you should do in the event that you lose your laptop. How do you report those type of incidents? How do you minimize the loss? Those are all the responsibilities of the data privacy officer, to make sure that people are aware of what steps to follow if such an incident occurs. And then there's the responsibility for managing that incident, escalating it to senior management, reporting it to the regulator. All of that falls within the space of the data privacy officer. So again, a very interesting field. It's developing. If you work in a big organization that has footprints going or plans to expand, for example, you have to be very mindful of the fact that if you're the data privacy officer, do they have laws in that jurisdiction around data privacy? Can we process information here for customers over there, or are we only allowed to process within their country? And what is that impact looking like for our operating model if maybe we're a central processing hub? So all of those type of things are what you as a data privacy officer are going to think about and advise someone like myself, the regulatory compliance officer, when I'm talking to you about, my line of business is going into XYZ jurisdiction and they have these restrictions around processing of data information, and helping us solve around those type of issues. So again, interesting area to specialize in if that's something that you're interested in. You can do certifications around data privacy these days as well. So if that's an area that you want to explore, definitely look into the different options that are available to you there. Okay. I'm talking so much, let me clear my throat. Okay, so the next one, international sanctions compliance. This is such an interesting area of compliance for me, because I covered a trade finance business many, many moons ago in my career, and I had to deal with sanctions a lot in that space, and worked closely with the sanctions compliance team in that organization. So it's a very interesting area of interest for me. So if you're interested in international waters, in trade, in international transactions, in international sanctions as a whole, then this is something that you, international trade law, if this is something that you are qualified in or have an interest in, then the international sanctions space is something that you should definitely look into. So sanctions. most of us understand what that is. If a country entity is misbehaving, whether it's human rights violations, human trafficking, those type of things, or they've gone to war, or anything like that, where the international community has come together and said, look, we're not happy with your behavior, and in order to try to bring you back in line, we're going to put pressure on you by way of excluding you from the international community via trade, via payment systems, via, you can sanction from sporting activities. Some countries have been banned from sporting activities even, all with the aim of putting pressure on them to conduct themselves in a better way than they are currently doing. So we've got your EU sanctions, you've got your US OFAC sanctions, you've got your United Nations sanctions. So all of those type of lists that each of those entities I mentioned have got lists and lists of people, entities, countries that have been put on their lists for various reasons. And it means that if you are a country that is subscribing to the United Nations or the EU or any of those things, and you say that we will follow the rules, and as a community act in concert together to make sure we're all acting right, then you as a country must, once that other country has been put onto the list, must stop doing business with that company, which means transactions can't go to that company potentially, which means you can't transport your goods on ships from that country, and you can't actually transport goods into that country either, or from that country, because it's a punishment basically for bad behavior, slapping on wrist. So at the end of the day, your role as a sanctions compliance officer is to be very aware of all of the lists that apply to your organization, making sure that you have a system in place for screening your transactions, screening the people that you're doing business with and the countries that you are transacting into or out of, and making sure that you're not transacting with those businesses, and not supporting businesses or countries that are not behaving well at the end of the day. So you have to be on top of the list, and if countries are removed from the list, you also have to know what to do in the event that a country is removed from a list. We also what happened with Russia and Ukraine recently, in terms of them being added to the list and certain entities and people and all of that. So it's really about being on top of that and advising your business and making sure that you're protecting them from the regulatory risk and the reputation risk associated with doing business with those type of entities. Because you can get fined, you can get into big trouble, you can, have your license withdrawn, you can have all sorts of restrictions placed on you for allowing those transactions to be put in place. So again, a very dynamic area, very complex, sanctions regimes are different, and the rules are quite complex, so you need to really study them and be able to advise a business in their complex transaction world as well, what is permissible, what isn't permissible, what is against the rules, what isn't. So a very interesting space to be in. Number 4, ethics compliance officer. So ethics is a very, very important area. It's all about doing business in a way that has integrity and is ethical, and is making sure that your organization as a whole and the people who are working in the organization are aware of what you expect from them in terms of ethical behavior, compliance behavior, and you have to oversee and assess the organization's program, policies around handling misconduct and unethical behavior. So that is the role of an ethics compliance officer. So you also have to support senior management in championing a culture of compliance. And this one is a bit more delicate and different, because culture by its very nature, it's, tone from the top. It's something that, the smell of the place is what they call it. So it's not black and white. Like, you must have transaction monitoring, you must do KYC, how do you put in place an ethical compliance culture? So within the organization, you might find one organization has a different approach to another organization based on their own values, priorities. But at the end of the day, ethics is ethics, integrity is integrity. So as long as it's aligned with the basic human understanding of what that means, then you're in a position to advise your business and help to champion ethical behavior and embedding a culture of compliance within the organization. So on top of that, you're going to be looking at topics such as bribery, anti-corruption, whistleblowing, conflicts of interests, all of those type of things that anti-competitive behavior, all of those type of things that are very well known for being areas where things can go wrong from an ethical perspective. And you need to put in place reporting lines so that people can report, whether anonymously or not anonymously, different things that are happening that are not aligned with the firm's, organization's ethical standards and behaviors that are expected. And then if there are violations of the laws of your code of conduct and ethics, and your policies around things like bribery and corruption and competition and conflicts of interest, things like that, if there are violations of that, your role as the ethics compliance officer is to investigate them and make sure that you're getting to the bottom of what the core issue was, putting in place any other remediations that need to be put in place, let's say increasing awareness if people really didn't know that actually I'm not allowed to accept this gift from this client, whatever the case may be, and ensuring that at all times you are shoring up and strengthening a culture of compliance and ethics within your organization. So again, a very interesting area. You always hear these cases in the media of unethical behavior, corruption running rampant in both public and private sectors. So in my opinion, every organization, every public sector space needs an ethics and compliance person who is dedicated to this type of work. So a very important role and an area of compliance that, there could be opportunities for you if you feel that you have a strong streak of ethics and compliance and policing, because this is probably the biggest one that leans more to the policing kind of side of things. But yeah, if that's something that interests you, again, very great career space to look into. And then, of course, last but not least, your favorite, everybody's favorite, AML compliance officer. Now, this space is probably the most popular, the most well-known. And like I said, a lot of people just think compliance equals anti-money laundering. But based on all the examples I've given you so far, we now, I think, all understand that compliance is multifaceted and there are so many different disciplines within the space. But back to AML compliance. If you're an AML compliance officer or interested in a career in AML compliance officer, what does that mean? What does that look like? So essentially, you're responsible for overseeing the organization's compliance with anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing laws. Whether it's your internal policy that you've put in place, you've got procedures put in place to comply with the international standards and local regulations around money laundering and countering that, then it's very important as the AML officer that you ensure that those are being followed down to the T. You make sure that the procedures around things like KYC and your customer due diligence and your enhanced due diligence and your risk assessments about your distribution channels, your countries in which you do business with, and your clients essentially are being conducted and understood and are up to date and are relevant to the business that you are doing. And you also have to do things like transaction monitoring and make sure that all those risks that you identified are being managed effectively and controls are put in place to do so effectively. One of the things you also need to do is to ensure that you're keeping abreast of the latest in terms of not only the laws and regulations locally and internationally, but also the trends in terms of what is it that the criminals are actually doing? What are the methods that they're putting in place this year? Because they don't do the same thing this year that they did last year, because they're always trying to evade the law. So you have to be very aware of these different typologies that are out there and putting in place measures within your organization to address those. If they go left, you need to go left. If they're going up, you need to follow and go up. It's kind of like a cat and mouse game, but you need to be addressing those things and putting controls in place and not leaving your organization open to being used for money laundering and terrorist financing. So it's also about monitoring, reporting suspicious transactions, and training your colleagues as well. You'll see that there's lots of similarities in terms of the overall roles and responsibilities. The area of specialization might just be different, but the roles and things that you need to do are what is different in some of these career options. So you need to make sure people are trained on anti-money laundering, those that need to know a lot more in depth, maybe they're operating in a high-risk product area, they get the level of training that they need, and someone who's operating in a low risk product area maybe gets the level of training that they need. And it's about making those judgment calls and assessing the nature of the risk that you face and the type of controls and training that you need to put in place to mitigate the risk in those different product houses. So again, lots of training needed. And then obviously you're reporting as well, internally and externally. So internal reporting, it's about making sure the governing body, the executive management team, everybody who has responsibility and different levels of responsibility for managing AML risk has an understanding of the current health status of the AML compliance program, any remediation work that needs to be done to strengthen the controlled environment and address any issues, let them know if incidents has happened. So as an AML compliance officer, all of that falls within your remit. And again, depending on the type of the organization, you might have, in all of these roles, you might have different levels within the same sort of discipline. So you might have an AML analyst, an AML specialist, an AML manager, and then your money laundering reporting officer. So within the compliance, the AML space, there are also multiple levels that you are going to get through until you reach the most senior levels. Similarly, with your data protection, you might have, start off at a lower level, and as you gain experience, move on up. Or you might have a flat structure in a organization if it's not so big, and just have your compliance officer and your money laundering reporting officer. So again, depending on the size, nature, complexity of the business, whether all of these roles exist or they're all rolled into one person's job, is something that each organization will determine for themselves. So there you have it. Those are the 5 roles, career options that you can have. You can either be a generalist, in terms of being a regulatory compliance officer, or you can specialize in the area of data privacy. You can specialize in international sanctions. You can specialize on ethics. You can specialize in the AML space. And there's so many other things as well, but there are only so many hours in a day, and I'm not going to go into all of them. So please, the moral of this video is don't be narrow in your understanding of what your options are from a career perspective within compliance. Explore the possibilities. A lot of the skill sets that are underlying, like training, like risk assessment, are applicable across all of these disciplines. You would then just need to now understand the area of specialization and the specific issues that area faces. So if you're going to have a career, feel free to explore all these options and then see what truly resonates with you as an individual, and you can follow your passion in that way. I hope this video was super helpful and informative for you, and that you learned about a lot of career options that are available to you, or only some of the career options that are available to you within the compliance space. Broaden your mind and your expectations and see where your career can take you. With that being said, thank you so much, guys. I'm excited to share more informative videos with you. If you've got your questions, pop them in the comments. I will try my best to answer them. Or if you've got a video idea, feel free to share that with me as well. And if I can do it, I absolutely will. But until the next video, guys, bye.